Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. In another fascinating episode of Careers in Discovery, Emma is with Theonie Anastassiadis, Senior Principal at Flagship Pioneering and the founding president of Prologue Medicines. Theonie's work has been all about uncovering groundbreaking biology and turning it into truly transformative biotech companies. She talks to us about her experience co-founding multiple biotech startups, the importance of culture in scientific innovation, the role of mentorship in shaping careers, and why curiosity is the most powerful tool a scientist can have.
Welcome back to Careers in Discovery. This week, I'm joined by Theonie Anastassiadis, who wears two hats. She's the Senior Principal at Flagship Pioneering and also the founding president at Prologue Medicines. Welcome, Theonie.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Let's start by talking about the work you're doing for Flagship and how you became involved in Prologue.
Great. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Flagship Pioneering is a venture creation company. And at Flagship, we work as part of a team of scientists, entrepreneurs using an iterative and systematic process to conceive, build, and grow bioplatform companies in human health, agriculture, and sustainability. So I've been at Flagship for 7 years now. And as you mentioned, I'm a senior principal. During my time here, I had the opportunity to co-found Alterna, which is the world's first tRNA bioplatform company that uses tRNA molecules as a novel therapeutic to address thousands of diseases. And I served as their chief innovation officer for 5 years, during which I took Alterna basically from an idea to a Series B funded company. And as you mentioned, I currently work as founding president of Prologue Medicines, which has a completely different theme and is very excitingly identifying viral proteins, which have been evolving for millennia to optimally modulate host biology so that we can actually leverage these viral proteins as powerful new medicines.
Extremely exciting, and wow, what an experience. I can't wait to dig deeper into your career. Before we go more into the details, talk to me about how you decided on a career in science and what it was about drug discovery captured your passion.
Yeah, so, we can go really far back, back to, the very early days of, elementary school, which might be pre-career days. But I've always been, fascinated by exploring the unknown. I was actually initially first drawn to space. So I originally wanted to be an astronaut and then an astronomer. But then I quickly fell in love with biology. As early as middle school, it really fascinated me. And I have this distinct memory in a genetics class I took in high school, where I just kept asking the teacher questions to the point that at the end of class, he actually pulled me aside and tried to clarify that it was not him who didn't know the answers, but rather that all of humanity didn't know the answers. And so it was actually quite a shock and something I, really that was pivotal in deciding actually what I wanted to do is the fact that, first of all, everything that was in the textbooks we were learning was not complete, that could possibly be wrong, and that it was actually people's job to actually expand our knowledge of the field of biology as well as all, scientific fields. And so that's really what inspired me. It was right then and then that I decided that is the job that I want. And I tried to understand what are career opportunities that allow me to be at the cutting edge, pushing these boundaries of humanity's scientific knowledge, and ideally being able to use those knowledge to be able to help patients. And so from, then on, I basically worked in a lot of different labs, which I'm happy to get into, where I was mostly working as a bench scientist, continued on to get my doctorate, had the sense of going into a academic track, so with the goal of opening my own lab. And that basically the second big pivot in my thinking was actually when I met representatives from Flagship and heard about this really unique venture creation model, and then got to meet a lot of people at Flagship, which really, the caliber of people here are really incredible. And then, of course, they're set in Boston, which, I believe it to be kind of the heart and soul of the biotech industry. And so all of those combinations allowed me to kind of pivot from that academic track to being able to work at Flagship, building these bioplatform companies, which not only allowed me to kind of push the boundaries of knowledge forward as I was doing in academia, but also move a little bit closer towards having an impact on patients, both of which are very strong drivers for me.
Yeah. What do you think are the main differences in terms of the way you work? You've had the experience within academia and now the more commercial industry experience. How would you describe the differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's many differences. The ones that really stick out for me are the first that I mentioned, which is that you are, a step closer to patients, because your ultimate goal is really not to publish a paper, but really to create drugs to help patients. And so that's a really important, I think, distinction. A second big one I actually think is the kind of culture of like collaborative spirit. So, in a biotech or a large pharma, you're really working as a team to execute on trying to bring that drug to patients, as opposed to academia. Again, these are general statements, but generally you have your own project that you're working on and pushing forward. And so I really enjoy that piece of it. And then the third component is really being able to work on very large problems. And so that's not to say that academia doesn't, but I think from having a collaborative spirit with working with many people from diverse fields, as well as a lot of capital, I think that in industry, you can actually take very large leaps, and particularly Flagship is known for this, is focusing on very large problems where if you are successful, you can have very large impacts on humanity.
Yeah. Touched on culture being a really critical and important part there. Mm-hmm. And in the work you do at Flagship, you're founding new organisations, and we all know once an organisation grows to more than one person, the culture will be defined no matter what. How do you steer that culture? How do you end up ensuring that you are being deliberate about the culture you create?
That's a great question, and a key one that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I think it's easier to find people who are technically very good at what they do, but what you don't always find is someone who's not only good at the what, but in the how they actually execute on their work. And as I mentioned, because these companies it's so essential to be collaborative, you actually need to really identify people who embody the values that you want your culture to have, not only because they will, start that culture, but it's that starter culture will very much dictate how the rest of the company will grow. And you can always change it over time, but that becomes much harder rather than getting it right the first time around. And that's not only dictated by the people that you hire and kind of from the ground up, but it's also very much, guided and needs to be very intentional from the top down. And so I think that both of these are keys to driving these cultures. You need people who are, enforcing the culture, but then you also need leadership to show that they care and implement a lot of incentives to make sure that they're building the culture that they're looking for. And the reason I think culture is so important is because science is extremely difficult, and you will inevitably find challenges along the way. And ideas are, hard to come by, but I actually think that many ideas actually get killed by the fact that you don't have the right people and right culture solving that problem. And so the combination of culture is what actually will unlock these new ideas that you're able to kind of drive forward. Obviously, if the science doesn't pan out, there's only so much you can do, but often you might end up not moving forward with this idea or with this really interesting solution because you don't have the right set of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we talk a lot. And I think even you mentioned it there, that you have to rely on the science, but with the right people in place, the right decisions can be made at the right time, and hopefully to pivot the science in a new direction.
Right.
Yeah, really interesting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've talked about your career path. Tell me more about the decisions that you've made to move into the roles and most formative parts of those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, going back far back to that kind of pivotal moment where I found out, essentially discovered what it is that I wanted to spend my life doing. The first decision I made was actually, which institution I would get my undergraduate degree from, and specifically selected one that had very strong biology programs. And so I went to small liberal arts school, to Haverford College, which is actually known for their very hands-on, very intense science classes. Some of the science classes that we take are 10 to 20 hours a week of lab benches, and that's just one credit. And actually many institutions have kind of modeled off of that. And then in my summers, when I wasn't at school, I actually tried to expand my research experiences by getting internship at the National Institute of Health, or National Cancer Institute, which is the government institution in the DC area. And then when I even studied abroad in Australia, I also found a lab to work in at the Bio21 Institute. And what I was doing with these different experiences was kind of complementing my scientific training in more an educational setting. So I was doing it in real world lab environments so that I could really understand what this career entailed. But then I also took the opportunity, because these were shorter internships, to sample the different biology spaces that I could play in. So I, looked at neurodegeneration. It was really interesting. And I think, part of it is that I'm so curious that it's always been very hard for me to, I wanted to kind of focus in, and I knew because I wanted to open a lab, and part of that path has to be getting a doctorate or a PhD, or at least traditionally is so. You actually have to become extremely focused during that time. And so I wanted to better understand what to spend my time on. And so from these different internships, I became pretty convinced that cancer biology was really what I wanted to focus on, for many reasons. Both biologically, it's actually very broad in its applicability, but then of course it has a very broad kind of like patient impact as well. And so to, really be sure that this was what I was interested in, I actually, once I graduated, worked for a couple of years at Fox Chase Cancer Center outside of Philadelphia, and had an incredible mentor there, worked on many projects. The entire lab was, a very supportive environment, which again, I think made me realize how important the culture that you're in helps in terms of driving, difficult science forward. I was able to author, a few papers there, and that really made me feel confident enough to pursue a PhD in cancer biology, which at the time was actually a not common option for doctorates. And so the medical school at the University of Pennsylvania was one of the few programs actually that at the time allowed that kind of specialization. So I jumped at the chance to go there. And that was a very formative experience. in not only further developing, my critical thinking skills, getting very broad scientific training, and then honing in my communication skills, which I later found out is not the focus of a lot of doctoral programs. But at the University of Pennsylvania, I think every couple of weeks I had some kind of seminar to give, or, talk to present, or I had to go to a conference. And I thought that was actually extremely helpful. And often I find that people don't really understand a lot of the science that is ongoing. And in part, I think it's because scientists don't get enough training to be able to communicate more to a broader audience. And so that was something I was very thankful for.
Yeah. Do you think that commercial element to your PhD might have been because it was so specialised? Was the kind of the expectation that most people within that PhD group are going to take that into commercial, more industry routes, do you think?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I don't necessarily think that's the case, just because it was actually part of a cell and molecular biology PhD program, and there were kind of subspecializations. But what I do think was well done is, I think when you're in academia, often you only hear about the academic track. And when you actually look at the numbers, it's actually a minority of people that end up, being able to stay in that field. So I think that one thing that was done well was the opportunity to hear about a lot of other careers, and not having that pressure to, stay in academia, and that only, successful people stay in academia, which can be something that you hear in academia. Yeah. And actually, that's how I actually heard about Flagship Pioneering. They actually came as part of, this, this kind of exploratory career path. And I still remember actually the person who came to recruit still works at Flagship Pioneering. And so she came, told us about, the model, their success rate, how exciting it can be to work there. And I was instantly hooked, because it resonated so much with what I wanted to do when I eventually ran my lab, but I could do it kind of instantaneously. And then also, as we discussed, with, immediate patient impact in Boston, and with really just incredibly brilliant people surrounded, around us.
Just a little bit on mentorship being something that you've been really fortunate to have throughout your career. Talk to me about people that have been key.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I have been very lucky at having so many great mentors along the way. From actually that very first internship at the NIH, which first of all, getting, having someone bet on you when you have no training and you're bringing them into the lab, you're probably not really gaining a lot from that person. You're really doing it to kind of help educate them and expose them to that area. So just getting that opportunity was something I was very thankful about. But my mentor there, who I'm still very close to, also taught me quite a few things. The first was really this idea of resilience and grit that you need in science. And so she very quickly was like, if you are not ready to fail the majority of the time, like, you shouldn't be pursuing science. It's very hard. And most of the time we're wrong about what we think is happening. And so I thought that was actually really good advice, and a good kind of mindset shift, especially when at that time you've maybe only experienced, academic successes, and that's how you kind of define success. And the other thing too was she basically made sure that I was learning from everyone in the lab, as opposed to just the person that I was paired with, which wasn't hard for me because I'm very curious. So that's something that I've always done. And I never know if it's because she told me that, or if this was a natural penchant of mine. But in any environment that I'm in, I try to learn about everything that's going on here, learn from the people in the room, and get exposed to as much as possible. And so that's also where being at Flagship just feels like incredible, because you have so many different opportunities within this role to be able to try working it on different aspects of different companies, within different companies, in completely different efforts and initiatives. A big part of that is also one of the things, as an example, is that I was heavily involved in our fellowship program at Flagship, which is, again, part of my interests of being able to give back from a lot of the mentors. I've had a lot of mentors over the years, and so part of what I'm trying to do is kind of also give back, and hopefully be a good mentor to others. And so that's something that I was in part able to do through the fellowship program at Flagship, but then also by being able to work with more junior people in the ecosystem as a whole.
If people are working in academia and looking for mentors in industry, what sort of advice would you give to them about how they go about making and creating those relationships?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think there's many ways of doing that. The first is by, attending seminars, events, any of these kind of high, like, multi-people interaction events, and looking for, talking to as many people as you can or you feel comfortable with, and finding that person that you kind of click with.
Yeah.
And then maintaining that relationship. So, following up from that interaction, asking to get coffee with them, and trying to see if kind of a natural bond will form. You can also have more diligent efforts where, if there's someone who, you admire in the science that they do, or maybe the way that they do science, or the way they think, et cetera, that you feel like you would love to learn from, you can also kind of directly reach out to them, and or be introduced to that person, and then again try to establish that. And then the other thing that I think is often underrated is, a lot of times in the environment that you are just passively in, there might actually be hidden in plain sight incredible mentors that might actually be, helping you behind the scenes, and or that you might not realize you can actually learn a lot from. And so I would also encourage people to just look at the environment around them and try to see, are there people that you actually interact with every day that you could actually be leveraging as mentors, and who might be more willing to mentor you because they can already see something in you that they want to help kind of grow and develop.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I've spoken to you before in our last conversation. I know that diversity and creating opportunities for underrepresented groups is something that you're really passionate about. How do you go about making an impact? How do you go around kind of making a change to the world that we see?
Yeah, so the first thing is, I think you need to just be thoughtful about it. There's no one solution for that. So I use many different approaches. First of all, I try to be involved in a lot of groups that help support that. So I'm involved in multiple of those groups. The other thing that I try to do more in my, everyday work is make sure that little things like making sure that job descriptions are written in a way that might not, exclude or include certain candidates. Make sure that when we are recruiting, we're not defaulting to a certain phenotype just because that might be the predominance in the field. Maybe trying to think of, like, unique ways of recruiting, maybe looking in fields that others might not, be looking into for kind of diversity of thought to be brought in. And then even things like making sure that your interview panel also is diverse so that you're not continuously selecting for whatever your interview panel looks like. And then, of course, it doesn't end there. Is like once you have people who've been recruited, making sure that you're spending a lot of time that the culture at your company is one that is not, again, catered towards a certain that's basically catered for a diversity of people, and then continuing to promote that. And often when you just do those, steps, if you start off with a diverse environment, it will keep selecting for a diverse environment. And so there's different ways like that of making sure that you can try to drive and promote that. And then, the other big often what happens is your own personal network and professional network ends up being very skewed one way or the other. So either you try to make sure that your network is actually broadened, or as you're thinking about, building teams and bringing in people to exciting opportunities, maybe you ping the people who bring differences in your, current life and ask them to leverage their own network, which might be biased towards that way, to again ensure that you're bringing in this diversity.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, because I'd really like to think that people understand a lot more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they know how to make the job descriptions the right way and their job advert. But you're going above and beyond that. You're being really deliberate in going to reach the groups of people that you might be limited to. And that really is the difference, isn't it? It's about being deliberate and taking real deliberate actions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very well said. Yes.
Yeah. Great. Next question I'd normally ask, and I feel a bit cheeky because we've had some great advice from you so far, Theonie. But it would be, what one piece of advice would you give to people who are early in their career?
One piece of advice. Let's see. I would say, I'll be cheeky back and say, and use a very broad term. I really think that staying curious and is really key. And the reason I feel like I'm being cheeky is because you can interpret that in many different ways. And so I think not only being able to learn more about how science works or how things work, but also about different techniques in the lab, so you broaden your skill sets, but staying curious about people. So when you're meeting people and, interacting with them, or, trying to find mentors in them, it's actually through this curiosity that you can find things in common. And then again, being curious about how you might, for your career path, how you might choose a specific role. And so going back to my experience, right, I thought that kind of the only way to do cutting edge science was in academia. And it's actually by being more curious about what other roles were out there that I was able to identify something that I think I resonate even more with. And so it's really about, staying curious in the broadest sense of the term, that you can make sure that you're leveraging every opportunity that you have at your fingertips, and then maybe being very surprised about where you end up.
Lovely. That's a really nice way to put it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what's next? What's next for Theonie? What's next for Prologue? What's next for Flagship?
Great question. I ask myself that all the time. I think that, the best thing and worst thing about this role is that there's so many different opportunities to pursue. And so it's really about being thoughtful about how you want to spend your time. So, what's next for Prologue? We're, so excited about the, year and years to come. We came out of stealth mode earlier this year. So we're, just beginning kind of our debut to the world. And part of what we're going to be really focusing on in the next, year or so is really continuing to build out our leadership team, building out our pipeline, and trying to, bring these novel concepts of viral proteins as powerful new therapeutics to patients to hopefully be able to have an impact in their lives. And then, of course, continuing to grow out the platform. And then, on the Flagship side, I'm also looking forward to, exploring new biologies and technologies to be hopefully launching something new in the near future as well.
Fantastic. Really exciting couple of years to come.
Yes, very excited.
So much to do, just coming out of stealth mode. That's exciting.
Yes, so much to do is right. But all exciting, so it feels like a lot of fun at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear all your words of wisdom and learn more about your career story.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I hope someone is, picking up some of this advice, and that hopefully that is having an impact.
I'm certain it will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.